My name is Neil Harris. I'm the Vice President of the Gaithersburg City Council. And as a city councilman, we don't have a lot of special privileges, but we do get first crack at who we want to introduce at the book festival. And I'm a lifelong science fiction fan. I've read very many books by this gentleman here, John Scalzi. So I was thrilled to see his name on the list. And I ran out and bought his latest book, which I enjoyed very much. I've read the interdependency novels, which I highly recommend. And also several of the Old Man's War books. I kind of lost track of how many, at least 3 or 4 of them. So good stuff. Go out and buy all his books if you haven't read them yet. They're terrific. Anyway, so like I said, I'm very thrilled to have him here for you. I know that my colleague, State Delegate Kirill Resnick over there was also thrilled and very excited and was geeking out at me earlier that John Scalzi was here in town. So I think you're in for a treat. We also have Andrea Pawley here, a local science fiction writer and fantasy writer as well, who is here to do the interviewing. So I will get the heck off the stage and turn it over to the main attraction. Enjoy yourselves.
I don't ever do this.
Yep.
How am I doing? Okay.
You're doing great.
I think it's safe to say that I lucked out of all the people in this audience, in this tent, that I get to interview him, because I imagine you all have a lot of questions and you would just as soon be up here talking to him. So, as you know, John, as you know, John, I originally contacted you to say that I wanted to do this interview in a inflatable Godzilla costume.
Yep.
And it turns out that John and I were the only ones who thought that was a good idea.
I mean, to be fair, at this moment with the temperatures, like 94 or something like that, I think you're happy that you're not there, because the thing that we would be doing was like hydrating Godzilla, which is the name of my next band.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a bit of relief, I should say. So I think pretty much everyone in this tent
But wait.
Oh, gosh.
Before we go on, you have to show them the actual T-shirt you are wearing, which is the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and Godzilla. Here, stand up so they can see it. Walking hand in hand as the burning destruction goes on. If we can't have you in a Godzilla suit, I believe that is a very satisfactory second place.
Thank you, John. I do appreciate it. My Catzilla shirt at home is very sad that it didn't get to be worn, but I'm happy with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man with them. So I think pretty much everyone in this tent has read some of John's books, or listened to his podcast, or read his blog at some point in the past 25 years.
24 this September.
Yeah. Or has watched something on TV that he helped write.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of us would have anticipated he would write a heartfelt monster adventure. So, just in case anyone doesn't know what a kaiju is, could you please explain what a kaiju is, John?
So a kaiju is basically a very large creature, like think Godzilla, think Mothra, think Ghidorah. Those are your basic kaiju. But it's been more expansive now. More or less, people think of it, if it's more than basically 15 meters tall, it's a kaiju. Is the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man officially a kaiju? People will argue back and forth, but I think it probably, if it smashes buildings like a kaiju, it's a kaiju. It's the duck theory of kaiju right there. And so in my particular book, the kaiju are more like the traditional kaiju of Godzilla and Mothra and so on and so forth. But the reason to to write about them is whether or not people know that they are called kaiju, they know what kaiju are. They understand Godzilla. They get the concept of Godzilla. And what was interesting for me is to sort of reverse what it was that we are generally thinking about kaiju. Like usually when we think about kaiju, it's because, oh no, they've come over here and they're destroying Tokyo or San Francisco or insert major city here. In this particular book, we are the ones that are going into the kaiju world, and it's a completely different setting. They are where they belong. We are the interlopers, and I thought that was going to be a fun way to address things.
Yeah, and I think your title says a lot of it. The Kaiju Protection Society,
Yeah.
Preservation Society. Excuse me. So can you describe? But you do actually have human main characters.
Yes.
So can you describe the setup? Because I just want to get this out there for those of you who have not yet read the book. I love this book. I laughed out loud. I kept my partner up at night reading excerpts to them, and it's really what you want out of a book at this time of life. So could you describe exactly? You just want to laugh and sleep well. John, could you describe what the setup is here? Because the setup is funny even before we get to.
I mean, the way you set it up is like, if you're in this particular time of life, and it's like, because you're middle-aged and you can't get to sleep, you might as well read Kaiju.
Yes, thank you. What are you saying, John?
The setup of it is actually pretty simple, which is around 1951, there was a nuclear event where a kaiju slipped over the bounds of, the multidimensional barrier and showed up here. And the powers that be, after a couple more times of this happening, were like, maybe we shouldn't have that happen, and set up an organization to sort of observe, describe, and ultimately aid the kaiju in living their lives. And this is what the KPS is. It is a fantasy story in that our first inclination towards these large, megafauna is not to make them extinct immediately, but instead to research them and find out a little more about them. But as far as it goes, it's kind of cool because it's sort of every nerd's dream is like, hey, would you like to have a job for 6 months out of the year where you go to a completely different but similar planet and you get to do science with monsters? And then every nerd's going, yes, that is what I would like to do, please. Can you sign me up now? I would be very happy. You can't tell anybody. I will tell no one, I swear.
Yeah. Now, John, your main character, though, did not get to Kaiju Earth because of being a scientist.
No.
Please tell me, what is your main character good at, John?
Lifting things. One of the things that I wanted to do is have a main character who sort of fell backwards into the kaiju situation, and in some ways could act as an every person. Like you could see yourself doing this because we've all had. I think most of us have had gig economy jobs at one point or another, whether it was delivering newspapers if you're really old like me, working at working as a fast food person or, service industry sort of thing. And then just to have that luck into this other sort of thing felt like it was easier path for audience identification than saying you are a scientist and you have spent 20 years getting your PhD and doing your postdoc and doing all these other things, which honestly with science fiction fantasy people is not that much of a stretch, but we're not just talking about y'all nerds, right? So as far as it goes, I thought that was kind of the fun way to do it. Now, Jamie has a master's and has a master's in science fiction, which, by the way, is totally pandering, right? Yeah, you're welcome, But so as far as that goes, there is still some interaction with the core nerddom. But even so, for most people, the salient thing is Jamie lifts things, and that's why they are there.
And yet you've surrounded Jamie with a cast of characters who are incredibly talented in things besides lifting, and so we get this bizarrely well-reasoned approach to Kaiju Earth.
Sure.
I was really not sure what was going to happen as the characters all left for their adventure. Where were they going to end up? Well, I was with you the whole time. is it okay to say how it is Earth and Kaiju Earth? Do you mind talking about that? I don't know if that gives away too much, because I think there's a lot in this book that's exciting. Is it too much to tell them?
No, I mean, it's the whole thing of Earth and Kaiju Earth are basically, it's a multiverse situation. You all have heard of the multiverse. I believe Marvel has done enough that this is not an alien concept anymore. So it's your basic multiverse situation. You got your Earth, you got your Kaiju Earth, and the reason that they can actually communicate with each other is that out of all of the infinite Earths that do exist, they are the only two that have nuclear power. On our planet, humans have created it artificially. And on the Kaiju planet, the Kaiju have created it through the process of evolution. And that's why they can communicate and sort of cross barriers. So as far as it goes, it's fun to develop an Earth that is in many ways like this Earth and in many ways aren't like this Earth. Like, for example, the meteor that killed the dinosaurs is presumed not to have actually hit the Kaiju Earth, and the development of flora and fauna has benefited or changed because of that. There are no mammals. There aren't really any birds. There are some reptiles, but it's lots of arthropods, lots of amphibians, lots of insects, and lots of kaiju and the various life stages of the kaiju. And it's really fun. Trying to develop this entire biome that, starting from, 300 or however many million years back and then moving forward from there. I mean, speaking as a nerd, I was sitting there going, this is cool. Look what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it this way, and I'm going to do it this way. And the thing is of course, actual scientists go, you got a lot of, I don't care if I got it wrong. It's still cool. But actually, this goes to the thing of here's my secret about not getting things that are of questionable science wrong, which is that I don't explain them. Right? Like one of the things you absolutely positively, and it's not a spoiler, absolutely positively have to confront with a kaiju is they are not supposed to be able to exist because there is the square cube law. And she's nodding yes. In fact, there is a square cube law.
No, you did such a great job with that.
Right.
I thought it was awesome.
Well, no, but that was. Yeah, so but that's the whole thing. There's a square cube law, and I have somebody literally one of the chapters starts with someone saying to the biologist say it. It's like, oh, okay, they shouldn't exist, square cube law. And they're like, okay. And they pull out this huge binder, go thunk. And it's like, that explains it, right? Do you get to read the binder? No. Hand wave. But the thing that happens is actual biologists and will come up and they're like, I have a theory. And they will explain their theory, which is actually just a hypothesis. But even so, and then they will have filled in all the gaps, and I'll be like, yes, absolutely. So yes, by not over-explaining. The one time that I did over-explain, I got caught out on it, which was that I have a handgun and it's a Glock. And I was like, okay, I need to check this to make sure it has a safety, and it didn't have a safety. And I was like, I need to go and change the fact that I may had a safety, and then I forgot, and then it got published, and all the gun people, a Glock doesn't have a safety. And they're like, I know. And I actually had to put it up on my website. This was an error. It will be fixed in the paperback, just so the gun people. It's not that they're wrong. But they're trying to be helpful. They're like, it doesn't have a safety. I'm like, well, that's bad design, but also, I will fix that.
No, one of the things I loved about this book, and I don't know why I got so focused on the helicopters and the airships and the drones, but I was really excited about reading of the adventures from this perspective, because then you get to see the whole world, right?
Sure.
And I'm just going 100 miles an hour seeing this world in my head,
yeah.
Regardless of what you're doing. I'm like, oh, very exciting.
Yeah.
So can you just give an example of one of the adventures that's air-based? And I'm particularly thinking of how you bring Edward and Bella together.
Oh, Edward.
Whatever you can say.
So one of the things that the Kaiju Preservation Society has, there's a couple of kaiju that are basically out of place, right? They normally would be in like tropical Mexico, and for some reason or another, they ended up with the equivalent of where Labrador is now, right? And it's Kaiju Earth, so it's like this, right, in Labrador. But because they're so far away, in order to continue to allow them to help them perpetuate, they basically using helicopters and pheromones as the go-between, spreading the love pheromones. And so there's an entire scene where there's two kaiju, there's a male kaiju and a female kaiju, and they're basically trying to spray them with pheromones to make a love connection. And on one hand, this will be great because if it works, then you get baby kaiju, which, great stuffed animal opportunity. I'm going to be taking advantage of that real soon. Little baby kaiju. But the other thing is that if you do it wrong, you will have two pissed off kaiju trying to destroy you in your little helicopter. So these are, and I don't want to go into too much detail because it's, the fun is in having that. But part of that is very much of it's meant to mirror some of the conservation efforts that we do with some of our charismatic megafauna that just don't seem to be very happy in the environments that we've created for them. And part of the answer to that is, well, maybe don't put them in the equivalent of a closet for all of their life. They might relax enough to actually breed. Put them back in their natural habitat. But we're humans and we don't like hearing that. We've got to help. So at least the kaiju are unbounded. We did not put them in Kaiju World or Jurassic Park. That's a great idea. But at the same time, we do feel some obligation to them to help them maintain their place in the world that they exist in.
So we have, in this book, there's this really interesting dynamic between the kaiju and these parasites, which I was, I really enjoyed the hand waving there. It was really cool. It was very good hand waving, actually. And so I started to think about these parasites a lot.
Sure.
And one of the things it reminded me of is that at the National Zoo, you may remember there's a scale by the cheetah enclosure. And if you stand on the scale, it gives you your weight. And it tells you at the National Zoo which animal would eat you based on your weight. And I was just wondering, are there any, how big would an earth animal have to be not to be devoured? I'm not even talking about the kaiju, by like these parasites, because they are terrifying.
Well, size is never an issue with what gets eaten by whom, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all going to be eaten by worms, and they're much smaller than we are, right?
Thank you, John.
Hi, everyone. You're gonna die one day. Hope you're ready. So the issue is never size per se. Like the kaiju themselves could theoretically basically eat anything because they predate on each other, right? So it's kaiju versus kaiju. They're fighting, and they're all 100 to 150 meters big, and and then they're parasites, which in the course of the book, I would say, are not just parasites, but they, commensal relationships, other types of relationships. But they are all, various sizes. Everything in Kaiju Earth eats everything else, right? And so it's not always going to be about size. A pack of wolves can bring down a moose, right? The moose is much larger, but there are more of the wolves, and the wolves work as a group to do the thing they're going to do. So there's always going to be a certain sort of competition, and it's not always going to be about size. It is not always going to be about numbers. It is not always going to be about anything other than what are the weaknesses of that particular animal and which animals have evolved to exploit those particular weaknesses. Humans can be laid low by mosquitoes. Mosquitoes kill far more humans than basically all other animals combined, including other humans, and we do a very good job of killing each other. But this is the whole thing. More people are killed by hippos than they're killed by great white sharks, and yet people are terrified of the great whites, and they think hippos are cute. Hippos are not cute. They will you up.
Yeah.
Like, not just a little bit. Like, you see a hippo coming for you, you're already dead, So.
Hey, I think we're going to get the call for audience questions in just a couple minutes. I see that lovely man back there who's about to wave at me. But so I just want to move off
Are we
of
really?
Kaiju Preservation Society for just a couple of questions.
We're moving
Are we?
quickly.
Yeah.
No, we're fine. We got another 10 minutes.
I can't see it, John, because of the middle age thing. What were you saying about me before?
Yeah.
No. But I did want to ask about, you have all these other projects going on, and I'm sure some audience members will ask about them too.
Uh-huh.
So, first off, Love, Death, and Robots.
Love, Death, and
Can
Robots.
you please just talk about, can you say what your involvement is at this stage with that production?
I mean, at this stage, it's done because season 3 is out, and now we're going to wait to see if season 4 gets a green light, and then hopefully, if they get season 4, they'll get a season 5 as well. So there have been 3 seasons of Love, Death, and Robots. I've had 5 episodes over the course of the 3 seasons, including the most recent one, which came out yesterday.
Yes.
And it's a reprise of my characters that are called the 3 robot characters. It's called 3 Robots Exit Strategies. And the genesis story of the 3 robots is kind of amusing, which is... Nava Wolf, who is an editor, she was doing an anthology called Robots versus Fairies, where some of the stories were about robots, some of the stories were about fairies, and you picked whichever side you were going to be. Nava basically I was at a convention with her, and she basically came up to me and she started poking me in the shoulder. She's like, "Write me a story. Write me a story. Write me a story. I will keep doing this until you write me a story. Write me a story." And I was like, "Fine, and I'll write you a story." And I wrote the first 3 Robots story, which was basically, if you've ever seen the Kids React To videos, it's like kids react to like a landline, and they'd be like, "This is a phone? What? How do you dial it?" And then, what's this? Why is there a dial? All that sort of stuff. It was meant to be sort of like a robot version of that, where you give these robots, long after the demise of humanity, you're all going to die.
Yeah.
So you give them a rubber ball, you give them a sandwich, you give them a thermonuclear weapon, and you let them guess what the goal of these things was. And so Tim Miller, who is the producer, actually, had bought a couple of other stories. The Yogurt Took Over and the Alternate History one, and I sent that out to him just to read it because I knew he liked the stories. And then he was like, "Yoink!" and I'm going to buy that. And so now we've done that, and then we had the sequel. And I think it's deeply amusing that the reason that this thing exists and that I've been involved with Love, Death, and Robots at all is because. A 5-foot science fiction editor just kept poking me in the shoulder until I stopped so I wouldn't be irritated anymore. This is how the magic happens, people. So yes, Love, Death, and Robots. We have a number of other things that are under development, including Old Man's War. People are like, "What?" Don't get too excited because it's been in development for 14 years, right? Which means that you should believe that it's going to happen, like literally when it comes up on the screen, because any moment before that, something bad. There have been stories about things are actually in production. They've got everybody there. That craft services has set up the table, and then they're like, "No, we're not going to do it anymore." So don't get excited.
I'm excited.
Don't get excited. What did I just say? Until it shows up. That said. Things seem to be pretty well for that. On the other, like I said, it's been 14 years. It paid for my daughter's college, so thank you, Paramount Pictures and Sci-Fi Network and Netflix, all of whom had a shot at it at one point or another. And then there are other things that are also in development. And again, you believe them when they happen. But if any of them happen, it'll be cool, and then I can retire on a pile of money, which is really the dream.
You were also in April involved in.
Oh boy!
You were,
wait.
You were
what?
implicated in John. You were implicated in the following situations. No, actually, you were interviewed by Library of Congress for Space on the Page, which is their podcast series.
Sure.
And I kind of like how you get to do all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
And in it, you told your yogurt story about how you got started with this 1,000-word story.
Oh, yeah.
I love that, and I'm jealous.
Yeah.
But mostly, I just love that the ease with which you do these things. Can you tell it?
Part of it is that I was a columnist for a newspaper for years, and part of being a columnist for a newspaper is you always have to come up with something else to write. So I became the master of 800 words of complete BS, right? And at least make it entertaining. I used to, the way that I describe to it now, because I was given a newspaper column when I was like 23, which was a horrible idea. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but now when people are like, so what was your newspaper column like? I was like, imagine a 23-year-old man mansplaining the world to you every week in the newspaper. Now you don't have to imagine it. Reddit does exist. But that's what I was Reddit before there was Reddit. Oh my God. So yeah, I am glad that all of those columns exist in this magical land that was called Before the Internet. Because oh Lord. But so what happened was someone had. So I've had the blog, and I've had the blog for, like I said, 24 years. And people ask me questions on the blog, and someone said, "Could you write a review of Atlas Shrugged?" You know, and the thing is I actually enjoy Atlas Shrugged as a potboiler. It's a page-turnery sort of thing, but it's a terrible book with terrible examples of humanity, right? And I made the point that John Galt, who is the hero of the story, is actually a pitiless sociopath that murders a bunch of people because he didn't get enough hugs as a child, and that if he had been anything else but in human form, that you would recognize his sociopathness. I said, if he had been a cup of yogurt and said the same things, you're like, oh my God, that cup of yogurt wants to kill us all. Somebody eat him quick. Having written that, I was like, so how would you write a story about a cup of yogurt taking over the world? And so I wrote a story, one that was exactly 1,000 words, and it had all the elements of a classic science fiction story. It had an absurd premise. It had a vague scientific reason for it. It had the complications of what it was that the yogurt was doing, and what it was doing, it seemed to be positive, but at the end you had that Shambhalian twist. It's like, what if, because the yogurt goes off to the stars, but where are we going to go? They're like, you stay put for a while. Stars are for yogurt. Earth is for humans. And it was all in exactly 1,000 words, which I thought was, because I think very well of myself. Well done, you, John Scalzi. You did that in exactly 1,000 words.
How long did it take to write, John?
It took 40 minutes. And then, of course, they did it. They bought it. And this was a funny story.
Who bought it, John?
The people for Love, Death, and Robots. And so here's a funny story. My friend Mary Robinette Cole, who is an amazing science fiction writer, right? I had gotten something else optioned. And I mentioned to her, like in a DM, Twitter DM, I said, I got such and such thing optioned. She said, of course you did. You got everything optioned except for that stupid yogurt thing. And I was like, I see you. I was like, well, actually, and then she writes, you did not. And I took a screen cap of the actual contract and I sent it to her, and she's like, it's not that I want you to die in a fire. So, and they did a wonderful job. The most exciting thing about that thing for me, and then we're going to open up to questions, and I will give you the rules of the questions in just a second. But the most exciting thing about it for me was the person that they had narrate it was Maurice LaMarche. And Maurice LaMarche, for those of you who don't follow voice actors, although I don't know why, is the guy who was the voice of the Brain in Pinky and the Brain, was the voice of Father in Kids Next Door, whenever they need someone to do Orson Welles' voice, he's the one that gets the call. And so I was like, wow, you guys should get Maurice LaMarche for this. And they're like, you're right, we did get Maurice LaMarche. And I was like, that's so awesome. And then they do, when the yoga took over. And I was just like, oh, Maurice LaMarche, you're so awesome. And then I met him at Dragon Con last September, right? And they went out of their way to introduce me to him. And I was just like, and I don't fanboy very much because before everything else, I was a movie critic. So I've met tons and tons of filmmakers and movie stars and famous people, and you get used to them real easily. But I was like, oh, Maurice LaMarche, you do such a great job at the voice acting. Oh. He's like, yes, I do. He was the coolest guy ever, and I was just so excited to meet him. And that was my, the cool thing about doing the yogurt story for me.
That was great. I haven't heard all the parts of that story. Thank you for telling it. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it.
Good.
I'm not sure about the time.
No, they did the 2-minute thing, so we have questions. And
John has rules.
Yes, I do have rules. Are we doing the microphone? Is that the microphone? Microphones are here and there. Here are the rules for questions. Questions must be in the form of a question. Questions must be one-part questions. And questions should be as short as possible. Think like tweet length. And the reason for all of these is there's actually a fair number of you folks. And so we want to actually have as many of you be able to ask questions as possible. And so if you come up and you digress, or if you have more of a comment than a question, it keeps other people from talking. And also, I will beat you to death. And people are like, wait a minute, you'll beat me to death? That's awesome. No, I won't actually beat you to death. Andrea will beat you to death. So if you have questions here, come up and walk up to the things. And in the meantime, if there's something else you want to ask while we're waiting for people to come up to the microphones.
Would you ever be Sifu president again?
No. I was president of the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America from 2010 to 2013. It's a cool job. You get to know all the science fiction fantasy authors. You get to name people as grandmasters, which was cool because I did Gene Wolfe and Connie Willis. And I will tell this story real quick, and then we will get to your question. So when you pick someone for the grandmaster thing, you get to call them up and say, we would be honored if you would accept this grandmaster appellation, and then we'll feature you at the Nebula Awards and all that sort of stuff. And so Connie is lovely, and I thought I would call her up and be like, yes, Connie Willis, it's I, John Scalzi, and I would like to bestow on you a great honor. Grandmaster of Science Fiction and Fantasy. And she answers the phone, and she's like, she's like, yes, it's Connie. And I'm like, oh, Connie, would you like to be Grandmaster? Okay, thank you, bye. I completely lose it and of course Connie was great. She was so much cooler about it than I was. But I was just like, I was going to be so cool, and I blew it in every way it was possible to blow it. So, but she's a Grandmaster anyway. So, yes, your question.
How did you come up with the premise behind Old Man's War? I want to know.
I mean, it's actually a really easy one to explain, which is the log line, which is like the elevator pitch of it would be Starship Troopers, but with old people, right? And that's kind of pretty much that's pretty much what I thought of it when I went to make it up. But I do remember this. Like, I came up with the idea of Starship Troopers, but for old people. And then I remember a drive down, because I used to live in the D.C. area, and I and a bunch of friends went to go vacation in the Outer Banks. And so while we were driving down, I was explaining this concept to my wife, Chrissy, and how it would work and do all this sort of stuff. And that was real cool and all. And so she was on board, and I was like, great, if she's on board, then it could be pretty good. But then, I was explaining it to some of the friends that we were doing the vacation with, and one of them was like, that will never work. You will never sell that. And this friend is a good friend, and I love him. But every time I see him, I'm like, I just sold it in Lithuanian. That's its 36th language. It went all over the world. Ah! So I'm not a petty person. But I do remember. Next question.
Speaking of the DC area, how was living in the DC area influenced your books?
I loved living in the DC area, and I was very sad to move away from it. My wife wanted to move away when our daughter was 2 years old because she wanted family around, and she moved us to Ohio, and I didn't want to move to Ohio because why would anybody want to move to Ohio? And so I thought I would trick her, and I said, okay, I'll move to Ohio if you can find me 5 acres of land. Because I grew up in California, I was living here. I ain't gonna be able to afford 5 acres of land, but it turns out in Ohio you can buy 5 acres of land for pocket change and lint. And she found a place. She says it's exactly 5 acres of land, and it is. It's 5.01 on the deed. So well done, Chrissy. I loved working. I love the fact that I lived in D.C. because I've written 3 books that take place in the D.C. area, the Android Stream and both Lock-In and Head-On. And having a knowledge of and understanding of the D.C. area has been incredibly useful for that. And also, it's just a great place to live, humidity notwithstanding. Question here.
Did Kiva Lagos come out fully formed, or did you have to work up to her?
Oh, Kiva Lagos, who is one of the protagonists in the Interdependency series. Kiva pretty much showed up as is, and I really, really like her. And also, Chrissy really, really likes her. I think it might be Chrissy's favorite character after Jane Sagan, and she likes Jane Sagan more because it is Chrissy. If you want to know what my wife is like, Jane Sagan is the answer. But she was an immense fun to write. She was someone who was all id, right? And there's something to be said about writing a character that is all id. And also the fact that she allowed me the full expressive use of the F-bomb. People are like, somebody did a graph where they were like, the use of the F word in like the interdependency novels, chapter by chapter. And you can tell which ones are point of view Kiva, because it's like 333, 13, 333, 27, 333, 82. So next question.
I was really captured by the note and the plant that Jamie found when they arrived at Kaiju, and the note that they left. And it felt very much like a teaser for something. Did I miss something bigger? Knowing it's a standalone novel, at the end of the book, I was left thinking, I wanted to know more about the person who left it and the note. And
so basically you want a novel based on the life of the plant, is what I'm hearing. So with the exception of the Interdependency series, I've never written a series that started off as a series. All the books were written as standalones. So when people ask me, is there going to be another of this or that or anything else? The answer is, does Tor want to pay me money? And the answer is, if Tor does want to pay me money, I don't know. I'm a very simple man. I am motivated by very simple things. And money is about as simple as it gets in our society. Every once in a while on the internet, someone calls me like a woke socialist. And I'm like, well, one, I'm you know, I am as petite bourgeois as they come. You know, there's nothing about me that isn't like, oh, capitalism, it's working well for me. Yes, if Tor wants another one, I would absolutely consider one, and then we would see where it goes from there. Question.
Yeah, as a segue into that, I guess, do you prefer to write onto a series, or do you prefer to do your standalone books?
I mean, it really depends. I mean, sometimes I like writing series because series are fun. You've already done all the legwork, and so you can just dive back into the world. You already know you have some buy-in, because if the series has been successful so far, the people who have bought the series before will buy the next one. Whereas with a standalone, you get to start from scratch. You don't have to meet any sort of expectations. You can just do what you want to do. So depending on where I am on things, it's, you know, I will like one more or the other. The book that I am currently writing is another standalone. And without going into detail of it, since Kaiju did well enough, they were like, let's keep on that vibe. It is not a part of the Kaiju universe, but that same kind of tone and vibe is going to be in this current one. But then after that, I will probably write either the next book in the Lock-In series, or another Old Man's War. A lot of that depends, honestly, and just to be blunt about it, if Netflix gets its act together and actually greenlights Old Man's War, because if they greenlight Old Man's War, I write the Old Man's War book, so we have book 7 that's available when the movie comes out, because, again, actual capitalist. Question.
What's your process for writing jokes in your books that are like laugh out loud funny?
I don't know. I mean, the thing is that for one thing, what's laugh out loud for you may not be laugh out loud for somebody else. It's all, a matter of personal taste. But the other thing is that humor is one of the things that I get for free. I think every writer gets something they get for free. Some people are good at dialogue, some people are good at description, some people are good at humor, some are good at making you cry. Humor is the thing that I sort of get to get for free. I don't overthink it too much. It's just part of my process. But always a good thing is that if I laugh at my own joke, which is not always a guarantee because I'm a really easy crowd when it comes to me. But if I laugh at my own joke, then it will probably most likely stay in. Next question.
So, lock in Lithuanian. How have translators handled ambiguously gendered characters?
A lot of it depends on the language. Sometimes the language does not allow for ambiguous genders. Sometimes they don't have genders, so it's not an issue. The translator's job is hard because you're not doing an exact translation. They're not using the exact words I'm using because I use a lot of idiom, and so they're going to use a lot of idiom that is going to be different idiom in that particular language, but is going to convey something similar. They are going to sometimes change names, and because, like, for example, the characters of Hickory and Dickory in Zoe's Tale. France doesn't have a Hickory Dickory Dock children's rhyme, but it has a different one that's in that same thing. So those characters are named differently in French and probably every other language that's not English. And so you have to accept that the translation is a translation. Now, whenever possible, I know that my translators keep the intent of ambiguously gendered characters to continue to be ambiguously gendered. But sometimes there's a question of whether or not the language has caught up with them or not, and whether the readership is going to understand that the character is meant to be ambiguously gendered. And again, language is a funny thing. I mean, the English language has used they, them as singular, as a singular descriptor since at least the 1300s, but then came the Victorian era where a lot of people got really rich, making a bunch of people really status anxious about how they used language. That's like literally where so many of our rules of language come from. Someone saying, you're doing English wrong, and here's how to do it right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to point at you specifically. Yeah. And so it's all nonsense. The best language is the language that conveys your ideas with clarity. Last question there, and then I think, yeah. So go ahead.
Is there anything at this point you've written that Chrissy has just looked at you and said, you wrote what? And you sold what? To who?
No.
Why is it the yogurt story?
No, Chrissy says with a bunch of, it's hard to describe the emotion that is attached to it, but the phrase, you are a man too lazy to fail. So when I do something that is absolutely ridiculous and I get away with it, her reaction is, of course you did. There are other people who have very much been, you sold what? You did what and how and why, and and that's kind of the way it is. The thing that Chrissy is good for is Chrissy loves me too much to bullshit me. And she reads everything, right? Like so the book that I'm writing now, she read the first chapter of it, and she read it and she's like, and I'm like, how is it? She's like, it's okay. And I'm like, fuck. Because then I had to go and rewrite it because it's okay. It's like, you should take this outside and shoot it through the head, right? And then the way that I know that she's happy with it, she's like, that was good. When's the next chapter coming? And I'll be like, okay, well, then we can go straight ahead into the next one. But she has always been, like I said, she loves me too much to, lie to me. She is the best of supporting spouses who calls you on your crap. This is a real thing that she does. Like, I will be sitting pontificating, being avuncular and talking about how awesome I am, and she will just reach over and she will pull my ear and go to let the air out, right? She literally does this. And one, it's annoying, but two, I'm really glad she does that because sometimes I really get high on my own supply, so to speak, and I appreciate having a spouse who is super cool who will call you on your crap. So, yeah. Wait, so I think we're done. Are we done?
Well, I think.
Wait, are we done? Do you have a question?
Yeah, sure. First of all, you were talking about how cheap things were in Ohio. I was born in Columbus, Ohio. So I know about that. I moved here in 1971. But my question is, who inspired you to write this book, and then how many different languages have you written it in so far?
The Kaiju one? The way that I got inspired to write this book was I completely blew up a previous book I was trying to write in 2020. I just couldn't write it. And I was freaking out about it. I had to admit to my editor that I couldn't write it. And I was just a few weeks out from a deadline. And I was like, I can't do this. Things are horrible. It's explained in the afterword if you read it. And he was like, okay, well, you've never blown a deadline before, so this is actually serious, so I'm going to let you get away with it. We'll take it off the schedule. And then I took a shower, and while I was in the shower, my brain was like, oh, hey, remember when you were freaking about that book you were never going to write anyway? Here's a completely different book. Flunk. And I immediately got out of the shower, emailed my editor, and was like, I will have it for you in 6 weeks. And I had it to him in 5. So the thing was complete panic, and also getting not to write that book that I was failing at miserably, and this was just like blessed relief after all of that. And sometimes that happens, and people are like, 6 weeks or 5 weeks, I hate you. I was like, that's 5 weeks after an entire year of grinding gears. So that's a real monkey's paw of a writing quickly sort of thing. And it's not even the fastest book I've ever written. I wrote The Consuming Fire, which is the second book in the Interdependency series, in 2 weeks. And that was because I looked at my schedule. I was like, oh, it's due in 2 weeks. And I remember saying to Chrissy, I'm like, you will shove food under the door. There will be a jug by the door. And she's like, you're not doing the jug, but everything else fine. And I wrote 8,000 words a day, and literally after it was done, I was like twitching like this because it was very bad for my RSI. And when it was done, I sent it off 7 o'clock in the morning, and I was too wired to sleep, and I was like, I'm going to go watch Teen Titans Go because that's about where the speed of my brain right now. And 10 minutes later, I had to turn off Teen Titans Go because it was too much. It was too much to follow. And Chrissy tells me that it was like a week before I answered anything in more than like single words, right? So let me tell you, just because you can write a novel in 2 weeks doesn't mean you should write a novel in 2 weeks. Actually try to space things out and leave yourself time to do it right.
John, we have like 3 more minutes, and then Vicky's going to do a little closing. But
I have a question.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm trying to be fair about this with a question about family.
Uh-huh.
And if I'm off base asking it, your daughter contributes to your blog and
Yes.
other things. So how does she contribute as far as editing and beta reading?
She's only read 2 of my books. Well, because it's weird, right? Right? I mean, let's face it. It's sort of like, it's like, this all came out of my dad's brain, right? Isn't that a little weird? Isn't that a little uncomfortable? So the first book that she ever read of mine was Zoe's Tale, which was written when she was 8 years old, me imagining what she would be like as a 16-year-old. Nailed it. I was on book tour. She didn't want to read it when I was in the house, right? And then I knew that she was reading it because she started texting me, "How could you do that to Enzo?" Right? Like she was apparently was weeping. If you haven't read Zoe's Tale, when you see the character of Enzo, don't get too attached. It's been out since 2008. I'm sorry, you have to live with spoilers at this point. But the thing about, and then she read Fuzzy Nation because she was asking a specific thing about novel writing, and I was like, well, actually, I do that in Fuzzy Nation. Why don't you read it? So she went ahead and read it. So she hasn't read too many of my books, but I'm okay with that because, again, she gets the live show. What's been really interesting for me is because she contributes to the blog. And part of the reason she contributes to the blog is so that I think she's a really excellent writer. One of the things that I want her to get used to is the idea that writing isn't waiting for the muse. Writing is, you've got a deadline, you've got a story budget, these are the things that you're meant to write this week, go ahead and get them out. And so to the extent that developing that writing muscle is one of the things that she is doing while she's writing for me. What I love about her voice is that her voice is not my voice. Like she has interests and concerns that are not mine. Her sense of humor is very well aligned, but not 100% of what mine is. And ultimately, the way that she moves through the world and describes the moving through the world is really cool, and it's her own voice. And what I want to do as her editor, so to speak, on the blog is help her be the most her she can be in writing, so that when she leaves the nest of the blog, so to speak, and starts writing for other people, or starts writing novels, or starts writing whatever it is that she writes, that all the things that she can do as a writer are already baked in, and she has the tool set to accomplish those sorts of things. And, without getting all choked up about it, because I can get super choked up about my kid, I am so proud of her. She's just the best. I mean, she's such a good writer, and it's been such an honor to be able to watch her grow and develop. Okay, so I think we have come to the end. There will be some announcements here. I'm going to be signing books in the place that's air conditioned. So if you have books that you want to have signed, come and see me there. I will be there probably in 10-15 minutes, I think. And I will stay until all the books are signed.
Okay, well, thank you to John and to Andrea.